the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we're heading all the way over to Vietnam to speak with Chris Knutson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been an admirer for a long time of both your work and CAELi. So
sweet.
Good to be here.
Cool. Well, you and I hang out every week at something that Gary Kristen puts on, so this is fun to actually have you in the hot seat and ask you what your favorite astrology books are. But we want to start with the beginning. So, what was your first astrology book?
Great story here. So, I was in college. I knew sun sign newspaper stuff. I was actually on university exchange. I was in Florence, Italy, and I needed a sociology elective. And there was this course called The Magic World of Astrology and Alchemy.
What?
I talked my advisor into, keep in mind, we're in Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance. And I talked my university advisor into, signing off on that, signed up for the course. And the textbook was The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need by Joanna Martine Woolfolk. That's a loaded title, but, if you're familiar with the book, it's kind of a cookbook thing. It takes every planet and house and discusses this and that. But the real thing I took from that course was this idea that, okay, there's more than just a sun sign in astrology. There's some order to this. It's a larger topic. And the professor was actually a philosophy teacher at the University of Bologna, which by some accounts was the first university in European history. I know that's a contentious point. Some people want to point to Paris or something, but I don't know if he was using solar arc or primaries near the MCIC, but he could go around the class and in broken English tell us students, told one of my classmates, something happened 2008, and the girl she didn't break down, but she was just stunned. How did you know that? You can imagine a completely new person in astrology thinking, oh man, there are secrets here. There are secrets. And that to me was so mind-blowing that, it's the occult, right? There's something beyond just the reductionist materialist. There's something more here. So I got bit by that and, really dove in and transitioned from there into reading just about everything I could.
Wait, so was that acceleration pretty instant? Like you took that course and then it was just, you were off to the races?
Great question. So I did my year in Italy, came back, and I had one more year to graduate and had to kind of focus. I was a double major, had to focus and get done with that. Then career stuff took off and I was in LA for a few years. And then, that really got me was one of the next books I'll talk about, but it was Robert Zoller's Foundation and Diploma Courses. And this was probably early 2000s. At that time, he predicted 9/11. There was this kind of thought out there, but the main thing for me was, okay, let's think about this. How is he predicting this stuff? I was a literature major. I was reading, surveys. I was reading Plato and I was reading Plotinus, the Neoplatonists, and I'm reading this Zoller course, and it's clear to me that he absolutely had a breadth of knowledge. He had read widely philosophy, history, and I was just sort of taken aback because I had read just at that point cookbook style or modern astrology, and I was just amazed by this breadth of learning. So that was probably 5-6 years after my college graduation. So there was this taste of it. And then 2005-ish, you could say I was really hooked. I was bitten by the bug.
There it is. Yeah. I think once you get that traditional hook and you see the kinds of eerie precision, you're like, whoa, I need more of this.
Exactly.
Tell me how to do it. I got to get it all. Okay. So if you were going to be stranded on a deserted island, what are the 3 books you'd take with you? You get an ephemeris because everyone gets one, but you have 3 other books you can take with you. What are they going to be and why?
So Astrologia Gallica, Jean-Baptiste Morin, that was something I came to James Herschel Holden's translations. That was something that was a couple years after my experience with Zoller. And Zoller, as you probably know, is indebted to a lot of Morin's basic structure of reading the chart and rulerships and sort of the last gasp of that medieval tradition. The reason why, it's the same reason I like the Uranian system, Witte. I like the idea of a structured, concrete, perhaps more scientific way to look at astrology, which is what Morin was really doing, which at times can be a little pedantic because he really lays out his case and he's got an axe to grind that way. But if you've got books 21, 22, 23, 24, that is the meat. There's so much there to work with. In short, his historical charts, his data for Gustavus Adolphus that chart is amazing to study from a historical context. But if you think about, he was present at the birth of Louis XIV. That data is fantastic. And you can go and look still today. You can learn from these charts. And, he had a system of primary directions, then solar and lunar returns. Then you can direct those returns, and then transits are kind of the cherry on top. But a methodological sort of concrete way to look at things. And just the fact that he had this chart data like Kepler, he had some data in common with Kepler, maybe Placidus. There were chart times that were maybe 30 minutes off or here or there. And you can it's like we're talking going on 400 years ago, like that to me is amazing.
Hardcore rules. Yeah. So directing a lunar return, does it stop working once the next lunar return happens?
That's the theory. And once you really get into the weeds,
can you direct it forever? Could we be directing Gustavus Adolphus's lunar return still?
He mentions how, I think he has one little aside where he says something like, you may not go down to this level of detail at all times. But of course, if you can get really lost in the weeds if you're directing returns, especially if you're going to start playing with like Alexander Marr and that school of astrologers. We'll talk about precession corrected, regular tropical returns, converse, and direct. So you're looking at 4 different charts. So it gets to be a little convoluted, but I had some fun with it. You can actually see in multiple cases that Saturn to the MC, and there you go. That's the end of a historical figure. It's not always that simple, but I should add, by way of mutual admiration here, I see your books behind you. I'm a hoarder. I loved books before I even got into astrology. I was a literature major. I'd go into the college bookstore, and I don't want to make myself sound like some cloistered monk just reading books. I have
wrong with that.
I'm like a honeybee going from flower to flower to try to take the best of what I can. But I was always in the university bookstore thinking like, oh man, there's this brilliant photography book. I'm not a photography student, but I have to have it. So I'd rack up my student loans with books. So to see that shelf behind you, I think that's part of my interest in astrology. Like you open a book and there are secrets, especially with astrology, but there are secrets in books. And so I've always been a reader. I always want to find things out. As you know, I like to look at translations as well. And I just think that in that sense, we're on the same wavelength. So
for sure. And with astrology, it's the only, maybe not only, because statistics might want to cut in on this or other types of financial forecasting, but the field of astrology, you open a book and you can read the future.
Yeah.
Right. If you're reading literature, the plot's already set. And if you read it again, it's going to be the exact same string of words. But if you read an astrology book, it's literally like Morin's even giving you these rules. Like, here's how you read the future.
Yep. And again, like these are historical personages. Louis XIV, the Sun King, he was present at the birth. So it just blows my mind. But you brought up another good point. Astrology and history. I think that's what fuels me is to look at the past to find out what was working in the chart then and do these techniques work. And so, yeah. There you go.
Very cool. Okay. Well, that's a heavy pick. Also, you snuck in more than one there on that one, by the way, because it's like how many, 26 volumes?
Yes, I know, but I did try to throw in books 21, 22, 23, 24. But Morin himself says that if you skip to the later books without first reading the earlier ones, you're doing yourself a disservice. And I think Zoller said that as well. So that's why I had to throw it in there. But for those of you listening, books 21, 22, 23, 24.
Okay. So those will be your favorite ones. The rest of them, they're just the carpet you sleep on or something.
That's right. That's right.
He is cranky, though. I did read him recently to figure out what he was doing with a specific facet of a different technique and to figure out why he was getting rid of the minor dignities. And
Yep.
he was so
because
sassy.
they're Arabic.
Yes.
Yeah, they're Arabic accretions or something. The same reason he thinks horary is another Arabic invention, and obviously he was a Catholic in France, and he's got an axe to grind. He's always got something pot shots to take at Ptolemy or Cardan.
Yeah.
So and so does it this way, and while that's fine, I clearly think he missed the boat, and this is the way you should be doing it. So.
It's like astrologers have been ornery from the jump. Okay, so what's your next pick? Your second book would be?
Sure, Planetary Stock Trading, and this was tough to nail down, but I would say to your listeners, anything by Bill Meridian with first trade charts. The reason I say that is because getting his books and looking at first trade charts, and I had an interest in the markets, not a financial astrologer per se, but just always interested. And I will say this, Charles Jane, many people have said this, the best way to learn astrology is to rectify charts. If you can take a first trade chart and you can chart, it's one thing I say in Gary's class, Gary Kristen, price charts aren't subjective. Sometimes you're going to talk to a person and something may or may not have happened in their life at this specific time. But when I started looking at first trade charts and using primaries and using simple transits, and especially when I got into Witte's Trans-Neptunians 7 years ago or something, that was an aha moment. Bill's got a lot of interesting topics, eclipse paths, and so much to see, but that's one that you can't be without. It really ingrained in my mind that this works. Planetary Stock Trading.
I worked with him in editing his column for the Mountain Astrologer. And there were some times when he would talk about like a converse half progression where it was like the rate was shifted to like half or double than what you would normally expect the rate to be. And I'm like, why is he doing that? This is wild. Like
it gets into like a fractal thing, right? Like, the same way Gary or our class might take, half a solar arc or a double solar arc or something like that. But time fractals are a big subject. And I think one of the keys to the way prognostication and directions actually work. That's a big topic. I know you talk about tertiaries and other progressions. I'm a huge fan of that line of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this would be a fun interval to add, thinking about different time scales along that logic. But with the market proper, I don't remember exactly who it was. It was probably either before or after I was recording with Patrick Watson. But in our conversation, he said something about like a reverse Fibonacci sequence with the market, or there's some kind of Fibonacci spiral with looking at the market that you can see the data shifting according to different like forwards and backwards on the time scale.
100%. Are we talking about converse versus direct? Think about, and this is my own little theory, but a birth happens and time flows equally in both directions.
Yeah, that's a diagram in Alan Leo on progressions.
No kidding.
In an appendix, he has a diagram talking about the birth is this entry point, and then you have credit and debit, and your debt today.
Now I think I'm recalling that. Is that from How to Judge Nativities, or is that from
No, it's on his book on progressions.
Progressed Horoscope?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's where I'm getting that. Maybe that rings a bell, but
or you just work with this stuff long enough and it becomes a thing where you can feel it.
It's stunning to think, and it's really a shock to the system. If you're coming at astrology from just a scientific materialist standpoint, because what does that say about our universe? If time is flowing both ways, and that, in theory, Jen, before you were born, time is influencing your life in the future. Like, it's an amazing thing that I still love to wrestle with.
Or unborn people are affecting us, and we just don't know it yet.
Exactly. And then it's like, okay, what is time? Time, going back to Plato is the movement of the celestial bodies. And it's like,
A level deeper than what is time is what is identity. Because if your chart is morphing by progression into, whatever time scale forwards and backwards from you, then what defines you?
yeah, yeah. Like you just blew my mind because I just thought, not to sound pretentious, but I just thought of a Walt Whitman Leaves of Grass, Year of Meteors. He basically is talking about, oh, year, brooding year, modeled with evil and good. And at the end of the poem, he basically says, what am I myself? What is this book but one of the meteors of the year? Like, what's passing in front of you? What am I? So, yeah, you
Yeah.
just gave me goosebumps with that.
Ooh.
That was a great thought.
Yeah. No, I spend a lot of time there thinking about the ways that, actually, mostly in the context of high school, because it's a very solid container where it's like you are a freshman, but your quaternary progressed horoscope is all of the senior class. Right? And so you
There you
can
go.
just
Yeah,
measure
yeah.
it. You can actually see. And then by that point, you can see where your tertiaries are and like even your secondaries inside your own classroom, if it counts. Because that's only a 90-day window before and backward, forwards and backwards from your birth. And so like in that container, maybe college counts, but there's a lot more dispersal in college, and school or early schooling is very contained, and so you can see kind of the people you love and the people you hate. And it's kind of like, are you just interfacing with your progressions? It's just a big fat petri dish of progressions.
Jen, you're talking right to me. I mean, I still have this. I think high school ingrains everybody, and you're bringing back memories. I'm having archetypal
Yeah.
relationships in my mind
Yeah,
from
but
high
what about
school.
when you
Yeah.
like progress into somebody, like your quaternary chart becomes somebody you're having a conflict with, and then it's like, wait, am I conflicted with them, or is it a part of myself? Like, and then your shadow and like Jung pops out of the chat, and you can go
Yep.
lots of
Yep.
places,
Yep.
but
Yep. Yep.
imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. So what would your third book be?
Third one, and I can't say this with more conviction than this. Rules for Planetary Pictures, Ludwig Rudolph, Hermann Lefeldt, by way of Alfred Witte. There's probably been 2 or 3 stunning moments in my astrological studies, and Rules it just blew my hair back. Whether we're talking about mundane, whether we're talking about, I have an interest in primary directions, which we'll get to, but I found through looking at hundreds of charts, playing with primaries, wow, Admetos, Hades, the real malefic trans-Neptunians. I mean, beyond a shadow of a doubt, effective in primary directions. I was just that's what brought me to Gary. I
Now
mean, I
I've
just
got
could not.
goosebumps.
I wasn't trying to deny it. I'm always agnostic on any technique. I love to check it out. I mean, I don't use asteroids yet. I know Bill Meridian's big in asteroids, and I always feel like you're missing some of the picture if you're not using everything. But I threw the trans-Neptunians on there some years ago, and it just shook me up. I would say this with the most conviction I can possibly say, that Witte and how they found the trans-Neptunians. I don't want to get too far in the weeds with your audience, but there is so much there for everybody. And while I'm kind of a history bibliophile and I read a lot of the old stuff, this is a 20th century work, and I would just encourage everybody to check these out. Don't get turned off by the trans-Neptunians. The system works without them, but I can tell you from my experience that hundreds of charts, primary directions, they work. So
Wow.
it's a must-have. It's an absolute must-have.
I love that mix that you're making, that you're adding the TNPs back to the chart so that you can primary direct the chart. And then, all of the things that you read about, whether it's like the contact is coming from the left angle or the right angle, right? So if like it's a sinister or a dexter aspect, and whether it's a malefic or a benefic, like would you consider a primary direction hitting Apollon to be more positive then?
Absolutely. This maybe I'm cut out for the Witte school because of the sort of terse or possibly darker colorings of some of the interpretations. But I'm coming from Jyotish studies, and I'm coming from Zoller's medieval stuff, and so I'm used to that kind of language. But when you look at great successes or great failures or death, you're looking for Saturn Mars, or you're looking for Hades Admetus, and that packs a bang. I mean, it just packs a bang. But to your point, real quick about the positives, Vulcanus and Apollon, when they were in square, basically from the 80s through the early 2000s, and Gary Kristen pointed this out to me and just blew my hair back. He said that's the markets took off, interest rates sunk in the early 80s. And that was my childhood, Jen, and yours too. The roaring 90s. It was like the roaring 20s reborn. Everything was positive. We won the Cold War, and markets, that I'm a product of that generation. And it's stunning to go look at the S&P chart based just off of that square. So,
right. Well, there was a kind of moment when the Iron Curtain fell and 9/11 hadn't happened. And in that little bubble, it was like a history-free zone, like where it was sort of, okay, the Cold War's over. We've got all of this, a sense of timelessness in a way, premillennial timelessness.
Yeah, there was that essay written by some political commentator. It was called "The End of History." Like, okay, we won, and the Chicago Bulls win 6 NBA championships, and everybody eats hot wings, and we're having a great time.
That's so funny. I recently talked about the Chicago Bulls on a podcast with Cesar Love. So, because I was asking him about sports astrology, and I'm like, I'm going to date myself here, but I really like the Bulls. And it's like, yeah, 90s kid. Cool. Okay. Well, I mean, one of my favorite things about the rules for Planetary Pictures is that the third edition was banned by the Nazis in 1935, and they immediately destroyed 3,500 copies of the book in public. And I have one of the copies of that third edition here.
No.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. So I have the banned one that survived the destruction.
Fantastic. That's amazing. I'm sure your listeners know your background in the German languages, German language. And again, I got goosebumps here. You get a piece of history in your hands.
Yeah. So, and then, it was because the Nazis, the reason why, because Reinhold had not yet tried to write The Combination of Stellar Influences. It was like coming to him in witnessing this. He saw this happening. The reason why it was banned was because of the TMPs more than the astrology.
Yeah,
they were like, these are hypothetical planets. We've discovered Pluto. How can you be promoting this fake astronomy? We know Pluto exists. You can't have Cupido and Pluto in the same orbit. So this is, we have to ban this now and destroy it.
This is great to ask you this question. Were these other astrologers, orthodox astrologers rejecting the TNPs, or the scientists
everybody
rejecting these hypotheticals?
Even in 1923, everybody was picking on the Hamburg School. And so when Pluto was discovered, some other astrological journals not affiliated with them were like, neener, we know Pluto's here, and it's this many astronomical units away from, the sun. And so it can't be in the same orbit because Witte said that the other body, Cupido, would be this many. And so it's physically impossible. But they don't understand the cosmology that Witte had, which is how I actually jumped into Gary's stream, because I came to give a talk about translating the cosmology of the trans-Neptunian planets. And once you understand that, like you're saying, once you understand the cosmology of them, they do exist. They're not a hypothetical entity. It's just you have to think about what a planet is differently.
Yep, I 100% agree with you, and I think that I encourage everybody listening to go work with these TNPs and just have an open mind. And I just can't stress enough how stunning it is. And I'd like to dig into your mind more about how they came up with the actual, I mean, you hear stories about they're on a battlefield in World War I and something should happen, and there's no computers, and like, these guys are brilliant. How did they find these things?
So Gary corrected me on that one, because I had that impression as well. And he was like, Witte actually stayed in a villa. So he was just living in this like huge villa, figuring it out.
Doing calculations.
He wasn't in the mud. He was hanging out in some big empty house, But anyway.
I always had this vision of him with that mustache sitting in a trench or something.
I know. I was like, no, he's too fancy for that. Okay, so let's round this out. So if someone were to come to you and say, you know what, I love your interest in astrology. Where do I get started? What do you put in their hand?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know these are not a book per se, and I bought these through New Library back in the day, but the Foundation and Diploma Course by Robert Zoller, Medieval Astrology, for the depth and breadth of the history, I think you have to have at least an understanding. I'm not saying we all have to go back and do Hellenistic medieval, but to really understand what's come before. I mean, he impressed me with that. And I think still, when our first teachers or our first books kind of stick with us. And if you want something with like some meat on the bone, some food for thought, that's one way to go. And the other ones that I'm going to bring up, I have an interest in primary directions. Primary Directions, Astrology's Old Master Technique by Martin Ganston. It's fantastic, even for beginners. It's clear, it's concise. It's on my shelf right here. I literally pick it up at least once a week still.
Aww, that's amazing.
And I've taken Martin's study course separately, which is, much more involved and you're calculating by hand. So huge fan. If you've used any prognostic techniques, if you're new to primaries, I still think you can get grounded with Ganston stuff, and I'm a huge fan. And I got to give honorable mention to Roman Kolev's 3 books on primaries. They're advanced material. I would recommend Ganston's first before you jump into Roman, but they're fabulous. You're going to learn, basically Placidian mundane techniques. You're going to learn what's really effective. And then for you and I, with an interest in Witte, wrapped parallels, basically they're midpoints. They're primary directed midpoints. So that's some stuff you'll find in Kolev. And to round it out, I got to give some love to The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need by Joanna Martine Woolfolk. It's for the true tyro, kind of wading in beyond sun signs. I just imagine we go back in our astrology elementary school and you're like, oh, there's so much more than just, oh, you're a Cancer sun sign. There's so much more. So that was an easy book. It lays flat. You can kind of work through it. And, I'd recommend that.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you for staying up so late in the day to speak with me over here on the other end of the world.
No problem.
How can people find you? Are you findable?
I actually am in the midst of getting a domain name and getting something up together online and having a presence. But you can find me at Chris J. Knutson 2000 at yahoo.com or simply Facebook, Chris KG. I'm in a lot of astrological groups on Facebook, but if you want to throw my email in the description, that's fine with me.
Great.
But look for a web domain coming in 2025.
Awesome. All right. Well, have an awesome rest of your evening, and I'll see you around.
All right, Jen. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Within Orb. If you loved this episode, share it with your friends, give it 5 stars, leave a comment. In Spotify, you can do that now. To learn more about the CAELi Institute and perhaps become a member or take a lab that we teach, please go to CAELi.institute. That's CAELi.institute. Thanks again to the E-Block Band for providing our intro and outro music, and also to Jen Brown of JJ Boots Productions for being an excellent producer. If you would like to have a podcast be edited like Within Orb, reach out to Jen. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next week.